Mistakes Over Failure, where CEOs and board members from around the world share the good, the bad, and the ugly of their diversity and inclusion journeys. We are CEOs.
We understand the pressures of leadership and the rules that are often unwritten.
I'm Dr. Christine Crawford.
And I'm Leslie Wingo. Together, we're here to spark honest and frank conversations that will encourage us to think differently, learn from failures, avoid inaction, and encourage each of us to make mistakes.
The world needs better leaders, and we can become better together.
Hi, Christine.
Hi, Leslie. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So excited. It's just going to be the two of us today.
Me too. I have a question for you because when I was preparing for this, I was trying to remember how we met, and I don't remember. One, I don't remember how we met, and two, I don't remember how we came to get to this point to do the podcast.
So I think we met initially on maybe a Black YPO call, or I first saw you on a Black YPO call. And then I think there was a Women's Business Network thing where you were in the room. And then there was the Athena program externally where we just happened to see each other. And then we started texting because I got your number out of the directory. And so that's where we started, I guess, getting to know each other because this was all COVID. So everything was virtual. We still haven't met in person. And then working with the Diversity and Inclusion Hub at YPO and working on that, thought about, let's do a podcast. And so then, I've met Leslie. She seems really cool. And here we are.
My name is Leslie Wingo. I am the president and CEO of Sanders Wingo Advertising. That is my day job. And then in addition to that, I am a public speaker. I've done a TEDx. I've been in YPO now for 5 years, and I'm excited to talk to Christine today.
All right. So rapid fire. First job.
First job, I was a runner for a company that was subcontracted by the United States Postal Service to deliver mail.
Okay. Dog or cat person?
Dog. Cats are gross. Dogs are cool.
Favorite beverage?
Red wine. The darker, the bolder, the better.
If you could be in any TV show or movie from your past, present, what would it be?
Scandal.
Really? So yes. Is it just the red wine or the whole Olivia Pope?
I want to, the whole Olivia Pope thing minus the sex part of it. Yeah, that would be awesome.
And then early mornings or late nights?
Yes. I have little kids, so early mornings are a given. And then that requires late nights because I have to work around their schedule.
I am Christine Crawford, and I am a lover of questions. And it's that love of questions that caused me to get my doctorate in epidemiology. And then was those same kind of love of questions with my customers and my team members and potential customers at McDonald's that I loved. I used to be a franchisee with McDonald's and worked in strategy, a menu strategy with the corporation. And it is the thing that absolutely sets my soul on fire is asking questions in a boardroom. And so I'm getting to do some advisory board work now and lead the Diversity and Inclusion Network for YPOI, which is how we met. All right.
You ready for rapid fire?
I think so. We'll see.
Okay. Okay, where are you from?
Augusta, Georgia. Grew up in Aiken, South Carolina.
What's your favorite beverage?
Water or wine.
Dog person or cat person?
Dog, definitely.
I'm glad we're on the same page there. What is your favorite dessert?
It changes. It depends entirely. It used to be creme brulee, and then I learned how to make it, and then I stopped eating it. At times, it's been gelato. It's ever evolving. I would say probably right now, it's cake.
I like cake. Chocolate cake. Okay. What is your guilty pleasure?
90 Day Fiancé, Seeking Sister Wives, all things trash TV on Discovery. So, for those who also don't know, YPOI was formerly known as Young Presidents Organization and is the premier organization of presidents and CEOs across the globe. And it's about CEOs who are in pursuit of lifelong learning, which is, again, love of questions and why Leslie and I are here together.
Well, thank you so much. In case people don't know who we are, and they probably can't see us, both African American, both CEOs at some point leading organizations, both rocking beautiful natural hair. So my question for you is, how do you navigate through these situations where you're the only one in the room?
I think it's the best way I can, which is to just be there and to do what I can. I think it gets exhausting and you get tired of being the only one. And there are definitely times where I'm like, okay, am I going to be the only one that says anything? Do I have to be the only one that says anything? And so fighting against that is probably the hardest part. And I think the other hard part about being the only in the room is trying to always show up as my full Black female fat self, because there are things that you want to say and things that you want to point out, but you don't feel like having to explain it and you don't feel like having to justify your experience. And so that's always a challenge for me. And I don't know that I've figured out how to overcome that one yet. So how do you feel? Because you had the same experience, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I was thinking about the summer of racial reckoning in the United States and George Floyd and what that looked like. And one of my dear friends sends me a note and it said something like this: how do you feel being everybody's best Black friend? Translation, not everybody knows somebody in our circles that is African American, Black, even brown. And so showing up and answering those questions about George Floyd and what does race look like in America, and let's talk about culture. What is Black culture? Have we really been appropriate? All of these questions kept coming at me. And I didn't realize until probably January, February, the following year, I was so angry and I was so tired, not of the questions, but of how people responded in that moment. I feel like there were a lot of companies and organizations that threw money at the problem, but weren't in action or trying to cause any type of solution beyond, we're going to elevate X number of people. We're going to highlight these people during, one time a month during February. And oh, by the way, maybe we're thinking about giving Juneteenth as a holiday. And so from my view, I wanted to start talking to organizations about how do we make this not a short-term thing, but a journey and a long-term thing. Because what happened in that summer was one thing, but it was built on hundreds of years of things. And so now how do we start rethinking what we've never thought about before? And I think that's why I get so excited about doing this podcast and talking to CEOs about what have they done? What can we do differently? How do we think about the problem? And to your point, let's ask a bunch of questions, right? Let's get our creative juices flowing so we can see where things go.
No, and it's funny because in response to that summer of, I think, awakening, I think would probably be a better term, I came up with a list of questions for my dear white friends because I was so tired of having those same conversations. So I was like, here's 6 questions that you can ask. And so it is, do you consider how others experience you, or do you only talk about how you experience them? As you look at difference, as you think. And it was really interesting because I was around a lot of other leaders like yourself, and they still couldn't help themselves but putting it back on their perspective, which is what I think we all naturally do. And the core of diversity, equity, and inclusion is making space for other people to share their different experiences. And that is so hard. It's even hard for us to do. Has there been a time where you've not considered the different perspective of someone in a way that you maybe should have? And what was that?
It's so interesting. So also that summer of 2020, and a year later, I remember doing a presentation because during all of the riots and let's talk about Black Lives Matter, that all happened in June. And that following year, it took me 12 months to realize this. I didn't even think about it being Pride Month. Didn't even think about it. Didn't even think about the people who not only took a moment and took a breath to set aside the month that they celebrate or that there are celebrations. But they didn't, I don't remember anybody complaining about it. I don't remember anybody saying, you know what, June's our month. And so BLM, y'all need to just have your 2 weeks and just scoot over. And so I wanted to acknowledge that perspective because there's something beautiful in when people can be empathetic and also just give everybody else room to heal and breathe. And so when I think back on it, could we have been better? Yes. Could we have done things differently? Of course. But I can't go back and undo that. But I can talk about it now and think about how do we talk about these things going forward. And so you and I spend a lot of time talking about this. How does it show up for you when you're talking to leaders of organizations or even in YPO about this experience of being other, or the only one, or the only female, or the duality of all the beautiful things that you are?
So one of the things that I learned, my primary day job now is taking care of my 107-year-old grandmother. And so through her journey into being less able-bodied, and so having to use a scooter and all of these things, I didn't realize how ableist I was until I was helping her. And so she would go to church in her scooter, and there are these cracks in the sidewalk by her house. And so she would always be like, I'm going to fall. I need you all to hold my hand. And I was like, no, you don't. No, you don't. You're fine. Like, it's not going to, because I can see the sidewalk. It's not going to fall. Well, I had to drive her scooter down the ramp. And I was like, this is terrifying. No wonder she thinks she's going to fall out that chair. And it caused me to realize I had been so dismissive of her fears, of the extra hand holding that she needed. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? So it's not the rest of her experience being stuck in the house for most of it. It's none of the rest of that, but just that fear around the scooter and the assurance and the extra things that she needed. I was completely and totally dismissive. And I got it because I was like, it's that kind of experience. And so for folks who don't have that, sometimes it's hard to say there's extra support, there's extra dangers that you don't see or feel, and you may never see and feel. And even if you do, it's only for a very short amount of time, but you've got to implicitly trust the other person and their experience. And so it caused me to be more empathetic as I thought about it. But it is still, so I also know that it's a conversation that we're going to continue to have and that it never, ever stops.
Right, right. And I think one of the beautiful things about YPO, it's leaders sharing their experiences. When people are sharing their experiences, we also have the opportunity to learn from those experiences as well. And that's one of the things that I love about YPO. But now I'm trying to experience share with folks who've never had this experience, nor did they ever believe that these things could actually be true in terms of what people are dealing with. And so I always want to create an entry ramp into the conversation, not where they're comfortable, but where they can be invited to. And I feel like when we look at Me Too and Black Lives Matter, one of the groups of people we forgot to talk to and bring them into the conversation were white men. And so I wonder, as we go forward, how do we start to think about bringing more of them along on the journey so we can share our experiences and learn, and vice versa?
Well, I think I tend to tell folks a lot of times, like, it's your problem to fix. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it is. And then I think in a business context, you are missing out on some folks who can help you see around corners. Right. So you're missing out on some of the things that could be an advantage, especially in innovation and in new customers, or making sure that your current customers are happy. And so it's really, whose voices are you missing? And so if for no other reason, you've got to be willing to hear some things that are uncomfortable. And I think it's not about the folks who are different changing. It is about the systems that have harped and made that difference so important for so long. That's what has to change. And I don't know. I think it's a constant. I think there'll always be somebody who's not in the room.
Yeah. And the other issue that I run across is that there are CEOs and presidents of organizations who want to do something, but they're paralyzed in what to do because they don't want to look bad, nor do they want to be called out or be canceled on social media. And there's some CEOs who've done a great job, some CEOs who've made mistakes where they've tried something and it didn't work and then they try again. But I think, how do we create places and spaces where it's okay for people to try and know that they're not going to get it right, that they're not going to be perfect?
Well, but I think you should explain why we call this mistakes over failure, right? So
Okay.
I think that's
Good point. So, in our view, mistakes are better than failures. Mistakes are when you try something and you don't even think it's possible and you may miss the mark, right? A failure, however, is when you do the same thing over and over and over again and you expect a different result. And so we are shooting for mistakes rather than failure. And so that's why we named the podcast Mistakes Over Failure.
And I think we want people to share the mistakes, because I think that one of the things that YPO, one of the gifts of YPO has been this level of vulnerability and sharing that we have with our peers. And so it's CEOs being able to share the hard parts of the journey and the mistakes in a judgment-free zone. And that's, I think, the thing that you and I want to create here, because that's where the real learning happens and that's where the real growth happens. And so, it's a lot easier to learn from other folks' mistakes than to make them yourself. And we hope to, I think, do that here. What do you think is going to be hard about making sure that folks are comfortable sharing those mistakes? And how do we, because I think that's something I wrestle with, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
It's a solid question. I think, one, being open to talk about it, right? So sometimes we make mistakes and then we clean them up and get it put together and then we move on. I think we may have trouble where people are going to have to admit that they fumbled and they had to do things differently. And I think it is hard to tell stories when maybe there is not a success at the end, when we're still in the messy middle of things. And so I think that's going to be hard for our CEOs. And I don't want them to come on and feel like they're going to get blamed for a bunch of stuff and shame. That's not the purpose of the podcast. But I hope they would be able to come on and talk to us about what they've done, what they wish they would have done better, or what they're doing that's great that is causing change. And so if we can get them comfortable sharing and knowing that the work is going to be, it's a podcast. We're going to share it and we're going to tell stories with it. But that what they share is going to be a learning tool, not only for YPOers, but also for other leaders, not only in the United States, but globally. And so if we can figure out how to get them involved and enroll them in this possibility, I think we have a really interesting opportunity to create change. And my favorite saying is, people hate two things: change and the way things are. Favorite.
So now I'm going to ask you a really hard question.
Oh, good.
But what I'm going to do is I'll give you a moment to think about it. So I'll answer it for myself to be equitable. But on your personal DE&I journey, right? Either as a only or as someone who has maybe not considered the perspectives of others, what has been, you would think, your greatest mistake?
That is a good question. But you said you were going to answer your own question first.
I'm going to answer it first.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a minute.
All right.
I'm going to give you a second. So in the spirit of being completely vulnerable and hoping to be that which I guess we hope our guests will be for us, there was an job that I had for a few months. And there were some statements that were made, some things that were done, and race was an underlying thing. And so the folks who were on the board knew it without me saying anything, just describing what happened. And it was such that one of the things about being a CEO is what things are okay and what things are going to end you up in court. And so I was not I knew that there was a risk of some of those things just from a management and people perspective, which again is why most companies end up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or have these big issues, is the people piece. So my concerns around that caused me to have to leave the position. And one of, I think, my greatest mistakes was not referring to that in my resignation letter and not demanding that the board and those around me at least acknowledge it. Because everybody acknowledged, not everyone, there were those who acknowledged it silently, but I did not call a thing a thing. And that has been one of my I don't have a ton of regrets, but not at least documenting it, not at least in that instance where there was nothing for me to lose. Calling a thing, I think would have forced the organization to have a conversation that they needed to have.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So I am from El Paso, Texas, which is the furthest you can go in Texas, going west and still be in the state. Being a Black kid there, growing up in a community that's primarily Mexican, Hispanic, Latino, however people choose to identify themselves, this is where I grew up. So I've been an only one for as long as I can remember. My biggest regret looking back on that is not the experience of living in El Paso. I love living in El Paso. I love this duality of had this opportunity to live in two different places and countries and cultures. And it's not that. I think for me, it is always trying to fit in to make other people comfortable. And to your point, not calling a thing a thing. And I remember just growing up, the extra steps that we would go through so we could try and look like everybody else or be like everybody else. And if I had the opportunity to go back, I would just be myself, right? I think that shows up and starts to show in business when I'm working with clients and trying to ease them and let them be comfortable instead of letting them sit in their discomfort of whatever was going on. I also think that shows up when I'm in different board meetings and we need to call a thing a thing. We need to talk about Black folks and how the implications that it has on healthcare, in my example, how stereotypes are not the way to look at people. We need to look at human beings as human beings. All of that to say, I should have said more and I shouldn't have said it with such a great filter because people would have heard it and understood it instead of just heard it and kept moving.
No, that's a great way to put it because it was the trying to filter and the trying to be appropriate, right? Because you also don't want to fall into the stereotypes of being either a hysterical woman or or being then the angry Black woman. And so I think it is that fear that causes us sometimes to not say things in the same way that it's that same fear that causes others not to act and to not say anything. It just has different consequences and different ramifications with all of us.
I think now as I don't know if it's that I get older or that we're talking about these things more, but one of the things that I want to make sure that I'm intentional about is standing up for and standing in for people when things are said. And so they may be in the room, may not be in the room, but not letting, as my business coach would say, it's not walking around the problem, just walk through the problem and deal with it head on. And I think for me, that has been the hardest part because there's also this part of me as a CEO in a comms business where I need people to like me because that's how we build relationships and do business. And so for you, I wonder, does likability show up in terms of trying to fit in, or does that not even matter?
So likability has not been it as much as I just didn't like confrontation for a really long time. And I think becoming a CEO and in McDonald's of all things forced me to do that. So I had to have lots of difficult conversations and not just with employees, with parents, with customers. So it forced me to grow into something that I liked the absolute least doing. And I think the other thing is very candidly menopause. So menopause has helped a whole lot with me being straightforward and just settling into, not because of the hormones, but just settling into who you are in the fullness of all of the things that make me me, and being, I think, less concerned about what I can do with that. Because the other piece of it is you get older and I can't change people. I can't change people's minds. Either you want to do something or you don't. And I'm fine with it either way, no judgment. Because I also can't judge, right? So it's as much as I want to judge others for not speaking up, I also have to acknowledge that there are times where it's difficult and I myself don't want to speak up.
Mm-hmm. I can be
Yeah.
a little judgy. And sometimes the judgment comes from how come they're not seeing the bigger picture? How come they're not seeing it from my view? And then I have to self-reflect and like, what am I doing that they can't see the bigger picture or see my view? And so how do I start thinking empathetically about certain things to hopefully bring them into a different world or a different perspective? Easier said than done. Patience is not my best attribute. So that becomes a challenge in itself in terms of how many calories am I going to try and burn on this thing to cause somebody to change? And sometimes I just don't have the capacity or the calories to do it.
And that I think is a frustration. And I think you see a lot of times about how chief diversity officers in particular get burnt out and they leave and that they don't stay at organizations long. And I think that there is something about these conversations because they are so personal and so hard that make it easy to get burned out. And I think trying to figure out how to stay engaged in something that there will never be a solution to, right? Like that's the other piece. It's really, this work is hard. And I think that hasn't been discussed enough, right? So that even if you are someone who is trying to do this right, who is committed to this, it's constant. And you're never going to get it 100%. And I don't know how you keep going when we're so goal-oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, I think all of us are judgy. It's the, you win or you lose. And,
right.
And I think some of it's also generational, right? So I think that boomers, Xers.
Yeah. Something that we had talked about, I don't remember when, in terms of we have people who want to help us and then people who want to bring us along and then making sure that they understand that the payoff is what we see in terms of this is how we create a better future versus here's something I'm going to feel good about it because I'm this white male bringing you along for the ride. Does that make sense?
It does. And I've had to tell people, like, get it or don't. Like, so I think that some of the business leaders who said, okay, I feel like I have to make a statement, right? So I've never thought about diversity inclusion at all, but everything, you go to Target, everywhere is pride. I feel like I got to say something, put a rainbow somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so my response is, okay, so if you do that and that's all you're going to do, then understand there may be some consequences, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's fine. If you don't get it, don't want to get it, don't want to change, that's fine too. They're just going to be consequences. And that's true of every decision, as you make it, like you decide to prioritize things in your business all day long, and you know that you're going to miss some things, and some of the things you miss are going to have consequences, and you weigh whether or not you're willing to have them. So I've gotten to the point where I don't even try. If you want to try and do better, I'm here for you. If you don't, I respect that decision as well, but no, at some point, it's going to come back. But I also understand that for some, they don't want to start asking questions and getting better because they don't want to get the answers.
Also very true. Also very true. Well, Christine, I think we are out of time.
All right.
Thank you for making time today. This was super fun. I wish this is where we had started because I learned something about you today that I didn't know. I didn't know what your PhD was in. So I'm going to have to dig into that a little bit later.
And I learned that you want to be Olivia Pope. So that we will have to have offline.
Exactly. Thank you for listening.
We are Mistakes Over Failures, a podcast by YPO, the global leadership community of extraordinary chief executives.